If Carl Jung had only one page to write to those who are tired of trying, he would start like this. You're not failing, you're waking up. But waking up is sometimes the hardest part of the dream. You've tried before, tried to change habits, listened to podcasts, followed advice, set goals, thought positively. Maybe you even convinced yourself for a few days that this time it's going to work. But when the rush fades, all that's left is the echo of something that doesn't hold up. Motivation was never the issue. It comes and goes. What might be missing now is an action that doesn't depend on the high. A simple, doable, honest action. A choice that fits how you feel today, not how others expect you to feel. This isn't a video to motivate you. It's an invitation to stop spinning in circles trying to fix yourself, and finally start acting. So, watch it until the end if some part of you still believes there's another way to begin again. A way that's more honest, calmer, and truly yours. Because maybe real change begins the moment you decide to stay, even if you still don't know how to move forward. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet. There's a lot more truth coming your way. Have you noticed how the idea of a fresh start has become a kind of anesthesia? I'll start on Monday, next month, after the holidays. When things calm down, it's always later, never now. And while that later never arrives, life keeps passing by. Not with grand tragedies, but with quiet little surrenders. You're still here, but part of you got left behind. The part that believed fiercely, felt brave, knew what it wanted. Now what's left is this strange loop, the hope for something new stuck to the fear of repeating the old. And so you repeat. You start with intention, but something sabotages it. A slump, a setback, a convincing excuse. Back to square one, again and again. Each attempt leaves a small wound, almost invisible, but deep over time. It's not just frustration, it's a kind of goodbye. A silent farewell to all the versions of you that tried and got lost along the way. Carl Jung said, "Nothing changes until it becomes conscious." And that changes everything. Because maybe what's holding you back isn't lack of effort, but unawareness of what's really driving your choices. It's not about willpower, it never was. It's about awareness, about the fact that maybe your life has been led by beliefs you don't even know you carry, inherited fears, invisible rules, roles you've taken on without realizing, and now they're suffocating you without you knowing why. That's the void that keeps repeating the cycle. You don't know why you can't move forward, but you feel something's holding you back, like a hand in the dark. It's not pulling you backward. It's warning you. You still don't know what you need to let go of, and realizing that hurts, because it means facing the truth that maybe the problem was never the world, not the circumstances, not the people. Maybe it was this almost. This, I almost did, almost made it, almost changed, that turned into a way of being. But now you're here, recognizing this cycle. That gesture alone already breaks the loop of fleeting motivation. It comes from real action, and presence is the beginning of any transformation worth having. But now that you've started to see this cycle, you might have started to notice it's not laziness, or bad luck, or weakness. It's repetition. It's something deeper holding you back just before you take the step. And when that pattern becomes conscious, the next inevitable question arises. What inside me is keeping me from moving forward? The answer may not be pretty, but it's liberating. Carl Jung called this the shadow. The part you learn to hide, deny, camouflage. Not because it's evil, but because at some point in life, it was judged as unacceptable. Your ego learned that to be loved, it was better to silence certain parts. The anger, the selfishness, the fear, the insecurity, but also the spontaneity, the desire, the intuition. All of that was pushed into the basement of the mind. And with every choice you made to please, to fit in, to survive, a piece of you stayed down there, waiting. Not to sabotage you, but to be acknowledged. The shadow is not the evil in you. It's the forgotten part. And everything that's forgotten, sooner or later, starts screaming for recognition. It's what shows up when you sabotage yourself. When you repeat a choice you swore you wouldn't make again. When you feel anger without knowing where it comes from. When you react harshly and then feel guilty. When you stay silent to keep the peace, but feel more distant from yourself. And here's the thing. As long as you don't integrate the shadow, it keeps acting on its own. You might call it self-sabotage, impulse, relapse. But deep down, it's just a part of you trying to come home. Integrating the shadow doesn't mean eliminating anything. It means including. It's looking inward and saying, this is me too. with shame, with fear, with discomfort, but with honesty. There is no freedom without that encounter, because real freedom isn't being perfect, it's being whole. Still, in this video, I'll show you practical ways to do that. But for now, just know that it's not your weakness repeating the cycle, it's your fragmentation, and when you start gathering the pieces, something new begins to emerge. That's when the unconscious, which had been silently in charge, begins to be seen. And once you see it, everything begins to realign. But there's something very important I need you to understand. Even on the days when everything feels still, something inside you is moving. While the surface seems calm, the depths of the mind are in constant motion. It's easy to think that if you're not trying, then nothing's happening. But the unconscious doesn't rely on your intention. It acts anyway. Jung saw this clearly. He knew that most of what drives our lives doesn't come from logic or conscious control. There are patterns repeating not because you chose them, but because there's an internal mechanism still unseen. It's not a conspiracy against you. It's an unrecognized structure that keeps running. That's not bad luck or carelessness. It's the unconscious doing what it does, keeping things as they've always been, even if it hurts you. And here's a game changer. This unconscious isn't just repeating old wounds. It's also trying to reorganize you. As confusing as it may seem, there is a direction. That direction has a name: self. Not the idea of an ideal self, but an internal reference that seeks to integrate what you show, what you hide, and what you still don't understand about yourself. This center, the self, doesn't want you to eliminate parts of yourself. It wants you to stop running from them. The anger you disguise, the fear you try to mask with productivity, the sadness you keep postponing, all of it is trying to be seen. Because when it's seen, it loses the power to control you from below. That's why discomfort grows when you try to live life while ignoring what you feel. That discomfort isn't a flaw. It's a request to be heard. You don't have to fix everything now, but you do need to stop ignoring what's been calling you for a while. The stagnation you feel may simply be the noise of your inner life trying to find space. And maybe the most important step now is this: realizing it's not a lack of movement. It's movement you haven't yet learned to interpret. Change doesn't just hurt because the new is scary. It hurts because the old still offers some form of shelter. Even if that shelter is already falling apart, you're not afraid of change itself. You're afraid of what you'll have to let go, of the parts of you you'll have to leave behind, of the version that, even wounded, still gives you a sense of control. There's a kind of identity that pain silently builds. You get used to it. You become the strong one who handles everything, or the one who adapts to anything, or the one who pretends everything's fine because you learned that feeling too much gets in the way. And the worst part, you start believing that's your essence. But it's not. It's just the structure you built to survive. Carl Jung talked about this when he explained the persona, the mask we all create to function in the world. It protects. It organizes. It brings form to chaos. But over time, it starts to imprison. Because the more you live by the persona, the more you drift from the soul, the more you disconnect from the inner truth that insists on appearing in moments of silence. But taking off the mask is scary, because it's not just a disguise, it's glued to your skin. And peeling it off is like dying a little, not in body, but in identity. Every real transformation demands that kind of mourning, not for what you lost, but for what you'll no longer be. And that's valid. It's deeply human. The resistance to change isn't weakness. It's fear of losing what's held you up until now. But there comes a time when carrying that old version becomes too heavy. It no longer fits. It no longer serves. You realize you're trying to preserve something that was once necessary, but now keeps you from breathing. That fear that's holding you back doesn't need to be conquered. It needs to be embraced. What paralyzes you isn't change. It's the emotional unpreparedness for the void it leaves before something new is born. And that's exactly where many people give up. Not because they don't want to change, but because no one told them that changing is also a grieving process. And every grief demands time, listening, and compassion. You're not failing because you're afraid. You're simply facing the most sacred part of the journey. Saying goodbye to what once saved you, but now won't let you move on. You don't need another podcast, or another video with powerful quotes, or a new course, a new method, a new planner. What your soul is asking for now isn't more knowledge, it's silence. But silence is scary, because in silence there's no distraction, no ready-made explanation, no dopamine. There's only you, and everything you've been avoiding feeling. The world taught you to search outside for everything that can only be born inside. It gave you techniques, formulas, gurus, speeches, and they all made some sense, for a while. But there came a time when, even armed with all those tools, you started to feel emptier than before. That's where many people get lost, because it feels contradictory. The more you try to understand yourself, the more confused you feel. And it's not for lack of effort. It's because you're trying to hear your soul in the middle of an avalanche of outside voices. Carl Jung warned us, who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakens. But looking inside demands something the modern world rarely allows. Pause. Not the performative pause of social media, with a coffee photo and a caption about self-care. But the raw pause, without distractions. The one that forces you to face the echo of questions you never had the courage to ask. Am I living my way, or the way people expect me to? Is what consumes me really mine, or is it what I was taught to desire? If everything went quiet right now, what would be left of me? That's why so many people run from the void, because in the void lives the truth. And truth, when it shows up, doesn't ask for performance. It asks for presence. You're not saturated because you lack content. You're saturated because you've absorbed so much, for so long, that now you need to detox. From the excess of references, from comparisons, from the fear of falling behind. The soul screams for silence when the mind's noise starts to drown out inner listening. Stopping is risky, because stopping is when everything you've been suppressing begins to surface. But it's also right there that something new can finally begin to speak. Not in a rush, not with ready-made answers, but with the calm of someone who, for the first time in a long while, is truly present within themselves. You're not broken, you're just full of attempts, of self-pressure, of expectations that were never yours, but that you carried as if they were. You're not failing because you're tired. You're tired because you've spent too long trying not to fail. There's a difference between being destroyed and being saturated. Someone who's destroyed has lost everything, but someone who's saturated still carries everything, and that's heavy. You spent so much time trying to align with what others expected, with what was said to be right, with what seemed to work for everyone else, that you got lost in the overload. Now the body can't take it. The mind won't respond. The heart doesn't feel. That's not your flaw. It's a nervous system crying for help. It's your soul saying, I can't keep being forced to function like a machine. You don't need more effort. You need space, to breathe, to feel, to not have to perform any kind of healing while you're still in the process of finding yourself again. Carl Jung understood this point with brutal clarity. He knew the psyche doesn't suffer only from intense pain, but from too much suppression. From everything you feel but don't say. From how much you demand of yourself without offering yourself any compassion. From the energy you waste trying to seem okay when all you really need is time to simply exist without pressure. You don't need to be fixed, you need to be heard. And maybe, right now, that's all it takes. An honest listening to what your body is already screaming, even in silence. The pause is not the end of the journey. It's what allows you to walk again, lighter. Because moving forward without stopping now is like trying to run with an open wound. Respecting that exhaustion is not giving up. It's finally understanding that sometimes the only way to move forward is to stop forcing yourself to stay the same. You're not defeated. You're just exhausted. And there's a kind of restart that's only possible after this kind of fatigue. The kind that forces you to shed everything that was excess. Not out of weakness, but out of truth. Sometimes, all you want is to disappear. To vanish for a while. To not be seen. Not have to respond. Not have to explain what you're feeling. Especially because, most of the time, you don't even really know. And you blame yourself for that. Think you're being weak, ungrateful, overly dramatic. But what few people understand is that this urge to disappear isn't necessarily a flight from the world. Often, it's a call to return to yourself. You don't want to disappear from life. You want to disappear from the noise, the constant demand to be okay, the exhaustion of performing a stability you no longer feel. You want distance from expectations, from the noise, from the gaze of others, because all of that started to pull you away from who you were, from who you still are deep down. It's a kind of longing, not for childhood or for a specific time, but for the version of you that was enough. That didn't need to prove itself. That was whole even while imperfect. That didn't carry the burden of constant self-improvement. There comes a moment when the pressure to evolve becomes self-violence. And at that moment, wanting to stop everything is a scream of self-protection. Your system is trying to save you from overload. Your soul is crying for help, but in a language the world doesn't recognize. Silence, disappearance, retreat. Carl Jung said that individuation, the process of becoming who you are, necessarily passes through this inner dive, and diving sometimes requires stepping away, not as abandonment, but as a choice to return. You don't want to disappear because you're weak. You want to disappear because you miss being whole. Whole not in the sense of perfect, but in the sense of connected to what's real in you. Even if that real is messy, tired, confused. Maybe you don't need to hide from the world. Maybe you just need a space where you can exist without having to explain yourself. A space of your own, even if small, even if temporary, even if it starts with just admitting, I'm tired of trying to be who others expect me to be. That's the beginning of a return. Slow, silent, true. And every return begins with a retreat. But it's not vanishing. It's a reunion. Up to now, you've walked inward. You've recognized the cycle. You've seen what was hidden. You've felt the weight of carrying so many versions of yourself without pause, without being heard, without rest. Now it's time to do something with all that. From here, the practical part begins. Small gestures, simple to carry out, but profound in their impact. Nothing that demands more effort than you can give right now. Just enough for the transformation that has already started inside to take root on the outside. And the first real step of that movement starts with a pen in hand. You've spent so much time trying to understand what you feel that maybe you forgot to ask the simplest question. What if I just put it on paper? Not to plan, not to organize ideas, but to create a space where you can exist without performance. Writing, at this point in the journey, is no longer a tool of control. It becomes a ritual, a way to bring to the surface what was submerged, to name what you couldn't explain, to create a meeting, not with answers, but with yourself. Carl Jung called it active imagination, the process of dialoguing with the unconscious through symbolic language. And one of the simplest, most accessible forms of that is spontaneous writing. No outline, no filter, no intention of being understood by anyone but yourself. You take a pen, a notebook, and you start writing, even if it's just this, I don't know what I'm feeling right now. That is already listening. That is already presence. Writing is where the soul can speak without being interrupted. It's where you can be whole, confused, incoherent, vulnerable, and still true. Because the page doesn't judge, the page reflects. It gives back what was buried under layers of mental noise, fear, and urgency. Maybe you haven't been able to say this to anyone. Maybe you didn't even know you felt it. But in writing, you reveal. And in the revealing, something inside begins to reorganize. It's not about writing beautifully. It's about writing truthfully. About letting your hand say what your mind hasn't yet had the courage to think. About turning chaos into clarity. Not because everything gets resolved, but because for a few minutes at least, you listen to yourself. And that, in a world where everyone talks but few listen, is already an act of healing. Don't write to fit in. Write to find yourself. After so long trying to adjust to what was expected of you, maybe it's time to create a space where there's no pressure, no comparison, no need to make sense of everything. Writing can be that space, a corner of your own where truth is allowed to show up however it is, without emotional makeup, without forced coherence. You don't need to write beautifully, or correctly, or with a beginning, middle, and end. You just need to begin. Maybe today the only thing you can write is, I don't know what I'm feeling anymore. And that's okay. That sentence is already a more honest beginning than any polished speech about overcoming. Writing has a purpose few people understand. It's not just for expressing yourself, but for listening. Because when you write without filter, without control, without editing your own thoughts, something begins to emerge. Something that's been silent, suffocated, waiting for a chance to be seen. Don't try to make sense. Don't try to write what you think you should feel. Write what's there now, even if it's messy, angry, hopeless. Because the page doesn't expect coherence. It just gives back what you offer. And in doing so, it reveals. Jung said that what is not brought to consciousness returns as fate. When you write, you create a direct portal between the unconscious and emotional clarity, not to control the pain, but to touch it with honesty, which is, in itself, an act of care. This daily practice of putting on paper what lives inside you is a way to stay connected to what really matters. Not goals, not strategies, but fragments of presence. And maybe you'll discover that behind the pain, the fear, the confusion, there's still a voice that believes. It might be quiet, but it's there. And writing is the most direct way to let it speak. You don't have to start big, you just have to start. After so much noise, pressure, and expectation, what can make the difference isn't some massive turning point. It's a small, intimate, consistent gesture. Something that doesn't require strength or heroic courage, just presence. You don't need a perfect routine. You need a space of your own, even if it's only 3 minutes a day. 3 lines written with honesty. 3 lines that say what's here now, without a filter, without a plan, without the burden of being productive. Writing 3 lines a day might seem like nothing, but in that little, there's a whole universe. Because those lines aren't just words, they're anchors. Daily reminders that you're here, that you matter, that there's a place where your truth can breathe. Don't underestimate the power of silent repetition. Don't overlook the impact of a gesture made with intention. Real transformation almost never begins with a bang. It begins in the everyday. In the simple ritual you keep even when you're tired, even when you think it's not working, even when everything feels the same. And then, one day, something shifts. You realize you're more present, that you feel more clearly, that you don't abandon yourself as easily. Not because life became perfect, but because you created a fixed point within the chaos, a place you can always return to when the world feels like too much. This is the beginning, small, but real. And everything that's real grows, in its own way, in its own time, with its own flaws and comebacks. But it grows, because it was planted with truth. Now I want you to think as if Carl Jung were writing to you, a letter based on everything he taught. You are not failing. You are awakening. If you've made it this far, it's because there is still a part of you that hasn't given up, even if it's small, even if it's exhausted, even if it's almost silent. That part is real. And it's with that part that I want to speak now. You are not lost. You're at a point on the path where the external lights no longer serve as your guide. But this is not the end. It's the beginning of deeper listening. The world taught you to seek meaning outside, but there comes a time, and maybe this is that time, when your soul begins to ask for the opposite. Less answers, more silence, less content, more presence, less control, more surrender. The unconscious is not the villain of your story. It is the field where both your fears and your strengths are hidden. And it works all the time, even when you think you're standing still. The difference now is that you're beginning to notice. Everything that is not brought to consciousness manifests as fate. And maybe this is the time to rewrite yours. Not in a rush, not to please anyone, but like someone who slowly begins to lift the rubble off themselves. You are more than the roles you've learned to play, more than the patterns you repeat, more than the mistakes you've made. There is something in you that has always been whole, even when everything around you seemed in ruins. This reunion will hurt. It will confuse. It will dismantle you at times, but it will also restore you, not to a perfect version, but to a version of yourself that is more honest, more alive, more present. It all begins with one gesture: staying. Stay with yourself. Listen without judgment. Write what you feel, even if you don't understand it. Return inward like someone coming home after a long time away. This letter isn't from Carl Jung, but it might as well be, because it's made from what he taught us to see, that within every crisis lies a possibility, and within each of us, there is a center that never stopped beating. May you find your way to it, with time, with care, with truth. So folks, by now, maybe you still don't feel ready, and that's okay. Maybe the confusion is still there, the exhaustion too, and that voice inside demanding strength still insists something's missing. But what you might not have noticed is that something has already begun to change. You're listening, and listening to yourself, honestly, without skipping steps, without forcing answers, is one of the most powerful things you can do for yourself. Because what transforms you isn't the impulse to get everything right. It's the quiet commitment to stay with yourself, even when every part of you wants to run away. It's the courage to sit with what hurts, what confuses, what seems hopeless, and say, I'm here. I won't abandon myself. The life you're looking for doesn't start with an ideal version of you. It starts with the version you are now. Tired, yes. Full of doubts, maybe, but present. And presence, when it's real, is enough. It doesn't need goals. It doesn't need a show. It only needs a small gesture repeated with intention, a space of your own, a single line written, a moment of true listening. Transformation doesn't scream. It's not in a rush. It whispers, and it whispers every day, waiting for you to stop running outward and start returning inward. Don't worry about believing in yourself right now. Belief will come later, as a natural result of your reconnection. What matters today is that you stay, that you breathe, that you listen to yourself. Because when you truly hear yourself, without trying to fix, without silencing, without forcing, something begins to realign. And in that space, even if it's small, even if it's fragile, something is born that no external content could ever offer you. Your own presence as a starting point. If you made it this far, leave the comment. I received the letter. That way, I'll know this message found a place inside you, and that you've chosen to keep going. And if this content truly moved you and you feel it could reach others who also need to hear this, you can directly support this channel through the thanks button below. That financial support makes a real difference. It allows messages like this to continue being created with the care, depth, and truth you just experienced, and to reach even further, to those who might be exactly where you once were. Thank you for not abandoning yourself. I'll see you in the next video.